The cockpit is laminated out of multiple layers of plywood. There are 4 layers of 3/8 inch plywood called coaming spacers and 1/4 inch top layer, the coaming itself. Locate the cockpit by marking a center line on the hull at the front and back of the cockpit opening. I'll lay out the pieces of the cockpit assembly next to the boat, ready for thickened epoxy. We'll use epoxy thickened with silica for this stage. The cockpit is installed in layers. To keep everything aligned, drive brads through the coaming spacers at the front and back. The coaming goes on last, then I'll start clamping. The first clamps should go on the center line. Notice I'm using little pads of wood to protect the coaming. You don't want big dents to ruin the finish later. The next 2 clamps are at the sides to bend the coaming down to the deck shape. Then fill in with as many clamps as you can fit. Hey, come here, down here. Check on the outside of the coaming to make sure that it's tight down to the deck and that glue is squeezing out everywhere. I use a rag dipped in lacquer thinner to clean up the squeeze out on the outside. The inside gets cleaned up later. While you wait for the cockpit to dry, locate and cut the holes for your hatches. Hatches give you access to the compartments at the ends of the boat. The Chesapeake-16 can probably carry 80 to 100 pounds of gear in these compartments. First, mark a center line on the deck. Line up the pattern that comes in the plans with the center line and carefully mark around it with a pencil. A saber saw is the best tool to cut out the hatch openings. The hatch openings are reinforced with these doubling pieces, which are cut out for you in the Chesapeake-16 kit. Use clamps to glue them to the underside perimeter of the hatch openings. Later, we'll add these plywood rims to the hatches to help with the watertight seal. We're going to let this dry for at least 24 hours. So you can pass the time Okay, we've let the cockpit dry for 24 hours. We've got a lot of stuff to clean up, though, to make this cockpit pretty, so we've brought the Kayak outdoors to do the sanding. I start with a saber saw to trim the excess deck. Next, I use a disc sander to dress the inside of the cockpit. Finally, I finish up the last bit by hand. A roundover with a router adds a nice touch to the cockpit coaming. Finally, like the rest of the Kayak, you need to give the coaming several layers of clear epoxy to seal it up.